Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 221. So glad you could join me. Today's guest, Joshua Mensch, is here from the Czech Republic, which is why we're broadcasting early. We are about 8 hours before the regular time so that Joshua could be with us. But looking forward to a great show. We have some people trickling in. I think I'm curious about what the turnout is going to be because, for some people complain that the Rattlecast is too late at night, and we'll see if different people show up when it's earlier in the day. But to start out like we always do, we're going to have our Poet Respond poet, and Lexi Pelle is here. Hey, Lexi, how are you doing? Oh, are you there? Can you say something?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Yeah, hi. So thanks so much for joining us. So your poem, "The Bats Are Having Non-Penetrative Sex in a Church," was really interesting. I love, Poets Response so often has poems that are based on the news, and so much of the news is political, especially in the last, 5 years or so. That it's such great to have a turn away from the really political topics. I love when people touch on things that are science related or just amusing, and this one is both. It was an amusing science story that caught your eye, and then you wrote this poem. Can you tell us a little bit about how the poem came to be?
Yeah, I realized recently that when it comes to like really getting like on my foothold in a piece, oftentimes using like the funny or the absurd, it kind of like the diving board gets higher. Like I'm able to kind of make a leap easier rather than starting with a really serious subject and then trying to move from a serious place to another serious place. So I just find it's like a lot easier for me at least to kind of figure out what a poem wants to do when I'm starting from a different place. I'm able to move more. So yeah, and this article was just so funny to me. Like the scientist who opened the email with the video in the church, like at first he almost didn't open the email because it sounded like it was spam, and just like the whole thing was very funny. And I was like, okay, well this feels like a poem.
Yeah, it's so true that when you don't, it's weird how when you don't have something at stake, really, like you're not trying to write like the great epic poem, you're just sort of playing, and then surprising things come out because of all that freedom that you have to sort of explore your own imagination. And then they take a turn to serious topics a lot of times too. But when you start out with that freedom of playfulness, that's sort of childlike almost, you get to go different surprising places. Did this poem take you somewhere unexpected? What do you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I knew like I just had a lot of fun with it at first. Like, I had like such a short window of time to edit it before I submitted it. But like at first I was like, oh, a vulgarity of vampires, must be I had like a lot of fun with like the language and everything, and obviously I had to pare it back because it was too much. But yeah, I've definitely, there was a lot of fun and play, and I had no idea where it was going to end. But I kept thinking, whenever I'm stuck in a poem, I'm always like, what questions does this poem want to ask? And I think that in this poem, actually, the questions ended up in the poem. But usually, I'm just like, what is this poem thinking about?
Hmm.
And so I think that that's kind of. But no, I had no idea where it was going. I didn't even know I was going to bring in like where I was when I was writing it or anything. I just, kind of let myself be open
Hmm.
to whatever.
Well, why don't you go ahead and read it so everybody can hear?
Okay. The bats are having non-penetrative sex in a church, like Christian kids, hopped up on guilt and hormones looking for a loophole. The bat's penis is too big, a scientist says in the article, and the tip is heart-shaped. What god of ridiculousness blew into his kazoo to make this morning of sensational headlines and half-burnt toast? There's laundry to fold and an appointment to cancel. The dog won't stop licking what doesn't appear to be a stain from the blanket. What's the difference between making love and making do? What does bat foreplay look like? How do you ask for touch, but not too much?
Yes, you see that personal turn it took toward the end, and I love too just the fact that scientists are out there looking at things like that. Like this is such a world that's rich, that's full of things to explore, and that's one of those things that people are out there. There are people who specialize in like small fruit bats, and that's their focus on life, and because of that, we get to have this rich world that we live in because we have such a diverse focus of interests, and it's great to illuminate that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Lexi.
Thank you.
Yep, that was Lexi Pelle with Sunday's poem, The Bats Are Having Non-Penetrative Sex in a Church. And now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Joshua Mensch. So sit tight, and I will be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Like I said, today's guest is Joshua Mensch. Joshua is a poet, visual artist, and founding editor of the literary journal Body, which is wonderful. I love it. It's probably my favorite online-only journals. He grew up in Nova Scotia, Canada, and lives in Prague, Czech Republic. His first book, Because, a lyric memoir, which is right here, a beautiful book, was published by Norton in 2018. And he was the finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award in Poetry. He also has a great poem in Rattle's fall issue, so we finally got to have him on the Rattlecast. Hey, Joshua, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm great. It's great to have you. You know, it was Francesca Bell who recommended your book. I mean, she's been a guest twice, one of the few people we've had on twice because we love her so much. And she said, you have to read Joshua Mensch's book Because. And I looked on my shelf because Norton sends me a lot of their books. And I thought, is it there? And I haven't read it yet. And I did. I think this was like 2019 maybe, or 2020. And it is just it's one of the most powerful books of poetry, a really difficult topic, but done really in a way that's just so rich and you know, sort of part of the literary canon. Like it's a real weighty book that has a purpose and staying power because it's such an important topic and so well done. So I'm so glad we could share this book and talk to you today.
Well, I'm really glad to be here, and thanks, Francesca, for passing that along. She's one of my favorite poets, so that means a lot that she did that.
Well, do you want to start out with an early poem, like maybe the introduction from the book?
The prologue.
Yeah,
sure.
the prologue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll just read through this. Were it not for a cabin on Cape Breton Island, with only mist to break the tree-lined horizon, were it not for both of us. I was 12, and together we read Homer's Iliad, not the Odyssey, though mostly Don read aloud to me. His gorgeous voice, his bathrobe slipping off his stiff, shiny shins, his legs like white radish stalks, speckled with long, wiry hairs. While outside snow hugged the forest, and a deep fog rose around the top of the hills. The snow, thick and wet, ideal for throwing. And every once in a while, the deep silence would be interrupted by a crack like gunfire as another spruce snapped under its weight. Bark shrapnel and rolling sound ricocheting up the narrow valley till it reached our meadow. An 8-sided cabin with a black stove that wrapped us in heat and made our knees itch. Flame pulse logs lighting our limbs with nail-width lines of blood. At night, he'd read to me from the tracker, a chapter at a time, then tell stories about his childhood in Kansas, the endless fields and grinding oil wells, floods that washed away low-lying houses and poor people with them. His father, whom everyone loved but him, his fat mother, his unhappy sisters. He'd read to me and tell me about my parents, whom he knew at school in Toronto, about a woman named Carmen and the man she thought was the devil, about his wife, Lorna, and her head full of brains, about the small college in New Mexico, where the fun ended when evil Dean Nydorf blew a tumor and had everyone fired, then sent poison pen letters after them. Dawn, Lorna, even my dad, anyone who wouldn't give him a blowjob. He'd show me dirty movies to inspire me to try harder with my body, for it was truly impressive how a guy could shoot his wad that far. It didn't matter that I didn't have a wad yet, but sometimes a small pearl of clear lube appeared at the tip and he licked it off, because that was my accomplishment. And even though it wasn't ready yet, he was proud of me. I knew the names of animals, the silhouettes of birds, and the sounds an engine makes when climbing up a hill. I could tell what gear and how far away his truck was, and had memorized the avionic controls of the fighter jets that patrolled the coast. He showed me how to fashion a battery from a potato, how to flood an engine. I told him the speed of a bullet underwater, the speed of the Earth around the sun. He told me that floating in space, in orbit, was nothing more than endless falling.
Yeah, that was the prologue poem to Because, the lyric memoir by Joshua Mensch. And so, Josh, what can you talk us through a little bit just of the general story of what happened? How did you end up, with Don under, his abuse, really? But what was the can you just give us a little outline so we know what we're reading and what we're talking about?
So the poem, and I think of this as just kind of one poem in different parts, um, tells the story or kind of recounts a sense of what the experience was like of knowing this guy who was a longtime family friend. I met him when I was 10, when we were living in Virginia, and I knew him until I was 15 when he fled the authorities. So there's this kind of 5-year period that's covered in the book. And it was just, it was a pretty kind of classic story of your friendly family friend, neighborhood pedophile who grooms young people, and in this case, me and a few other people I knew, and enveloped him in the kind of the cult-like environment of his world. And it was a process of kind of seduction and subtle coercion and brainwashing and all the kind of stuff that goes along with that. And this guy was like an expert manipulator, right? And it wasn't just like the kids, it was like their parents, the friends, the entire community. I mean, this was a really well-loved man, widely respected man. Despite all outward signs that should have like raised flags. It's not an improbable or an unusual story, but in this case, it was mine, and it made for an interesting subject matter to write about.
Mm-hmm. And why did you want to put it together in a book? I mean, one of the things that just makes you think about so much is how, it's sort of going on right in front of everybody's faces, but they don't see it. There's a sort of like willful ignorance, like people don't want to see what's going on. And is that part of it? Having these kind of stories shared so that people know how those type of people operate, or what was it that motivated you to put this together in a book?
I think my motivations were less public at first. At a certain point, the news of this guy and what he did came out, and the ability to lie about it, it was impossible, right? So, this guy, when I was 15, his cover got blown and he fled. And so there were, a lot of questions, from parents, teachers, whoever, friends, and at least from my side, a lot of denials. And there was a certain point where that just wasn't possible or practical anymore. partly because he got caught and the police got involved in courts and various things. And that let out a flood of questions. And every answer was just unsatisfying, right? There was no satisfactory answer. There's no way to explain that kind of thing in rational terms. And I'd wanted to write about it partly as a way of trying to understand that encounter, understand that experience. Someone who works through things by writing about them, works out an understanding by writing about them. But also as a way of trying to answer those questions for other people, for friends and family. And the structure of the book, I mean, what sort of allowed me to finally do that was encountering a structure that the anaphora of because, where every statement is an implied answer, or it's an answer to an implied question. And then the writing of the book was partly just memory lane, right? Just letting kind of various scenes from memory play out, and later I organized it into a narrative. But the real fun was just discovering a poetic device that allowed me to tell a story that way. So as horrifying as it may be to read, it was great fun to write in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, that's definitely interesting, and healing too. I imagine, like finding out, getting back and coming to terms with those things that you had difficulty thinking about. I mean, that's sort of the point of poetry. So many people talk about, going into poetry in the first place to come through difficult situations like that. Did you find the process healing?
No, not really. I understand where you're coming from when you say that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a kind of a common sort of approach. Um, Partly because these weren't things that were difficult for me to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been thinking about them a lot before the book. I did find that they were difficult to talk about at a certain point, but um, I found they were really difficult for me to talk about with other people who went through that experience, like other friends from that camp, people who were at various states of disclosure or honesty with themselves. And so I did feel that, in writing this, I was articulating something for other people as
Mm-hmm.
much as for myself. But a curious thing did happen, and I guess you could kind of put it in the healing bucket, which is there's a kind of evacuation that comes with writing, where all of the stuff in the book is stuff that I don't really have a lot of access to on the level of memory anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of a papering over. So now the filter is there. And the memory I have is the memory of writing it, or what's in the book, or the way it's encapsulated. Those memories aren't as raw or accessible anymore. They were really like sort of ripped out of my brain. And that was an unexpected thing that happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's hear more from the book. Next up, we start on page 11. Is what you had next.
So I'll just say first that I'm going to read 4 quick scenes that take places at different points in time and in different locations, but I won't read those placeholders. I'll just kind of read through it, but it's okay. You'll get it. Because the room is bright, skylit, painted white with a mirrored wall and a queen-size bed. Because it is July, hot, and I am half undressed already. Because I let him undress me the rest of the way. Look, when he tells me to look. Says, look at yourself. Aren't you beautiful? Because I am disgusted by the word beautiful. A word for babies and girls. A word for sisters. For my mother. Because I dive deep into the bed and let it swallow me. Then pull him down so that it swallows him too. Because the room is small, damp, cold, clinging to our skin like the dew on the TV, every surface wet from the AC. Because outside the city is cooking, and we have to keep the television loud to drown out the air conditioner's rattle, which won't stop. We won't stop it. And wait for night to fall so we can finally go out. Times Square lit up, a glittering current of bodies and glass, where 3 feet in any direction gets you lost. So he wants to hold my hand, which is embarrassing, because he uses the word kidnapped when I won't let him, and says, "You don't know what some people are capable of." And it's true, I don't. With dawn, the night is always half awake. When we sleep, he wakes me in my dreams. Because the room is spare, in an annex to the house where no one discovers us, where no one can hear me hold my breath, then let it go, like a river, like a flood. Because the room is not a room, but a tent near the edge of a cliff. Because the wind won't stop. Because we wake up in a pile at the bottom of the tent, the stakes nearly out, the lines taut. Because in the dream I am having, I fail to resist, or my resistance turns into something else. Because it's daybreak and the birds are starting up. Because the other boys are awake and want to go whale watching. Because breakfasts need to be made and someone calls his name, so his hand quickens. Because I come quick as his hand, which is a hammer.
And that was 4 more sections from Because by Joshua Mensch. And we could see in those sections we looked at that the main part of the book is this trigger kind of because. So many of the sections start out with because the room. And really the poem or the book isn't only one long poem is a lyric memoir. It's also one long sentence. The central section, you saw at the end of each of those sections, they end in a semicolon. And every sentence is connected by a semicolon. So it really is one long sentence moving through with this trigger of because that sort of starts out the memory. And so often it's because the room. So we start back in that place and then we sort of pull the memory out of that because from, as you mentioned before, the unanswered question. Or unmentioned question. How did you come to this form for doing the book? It's I've never seen a book like it, and it really it reads you talk about a lyric memoir, but it reads like a really gripping memoir with rising action and sort of this tension that builds and builds, and there's sort of climax scenes, and it feels like reading a novel, but we get the intensity, the lyric intensity of poetry too. And it's because of this format that you found. So how did you find this structure that you ended up using for the book?
Partly, but by accident, luck, and a little bit of theft. I, it just, it kind of floated past me, the phrase, because the room. And I realized that the room was a great way of framing memory. Previously when I tried to write about this, I tried, different strategies like prose, and I tried writing, like a prose memoir or even like a kind of auto fiction. And, I would be like 30 pages in and like 2 days had elapsed. And I was like, how am I going to cover 5 years? It'd be like War and Peace. It didn't have that sort of intensity. And I started to realize I needed to find a poetic form for it because only poetry would enable the kind of compression, the lyric compression that a poem enables, would allow me to create the immediacy of experience that would achieve like one central objective, which is to answer the question of what was it like by saying, here, experience it. I won't explain it. I'm not going to render judgment on it. I'm not going to give you any statements about what it means. I'm just going to run you through that experience. And with a poem, you have far fewer narrative expectations, right? You don't have that sort of architecture of plot or character development, right? There's a lot more grace in terms of what people are willing to do. The architecture of the lyric enables a stepping into experience in a different way that doesn't require all of the setup. And there were 2 books that were really important to leading me into the lucky discovery of that phrase, because the room. One was a book by an American poet, Donna Stonecipher,
Mm-hmm.
called Model City, which I think hadn't even been published yet. But she's a friend, and she lives in Berlin, and I've been to readings of hers. I think I have the book somewhere around here actually. Um, oh, I'll find it.
Hmm.
But she has this anaphora that she uses, and it was called "It was like." It was like something, something, something. It was like, and all of the lines, they're prose poems,
Hmm.
but they use this aphoristic structure. And I think that music was very much in my ear. Um, and then there was a kind of associative trigger of answering, people are asking, what was it like?
Hmm.
And then it was like, and then, so, I think that music was part of it. And another book that was important was Sarah Peters' 1996. She's a Canadian poet who had a book that came out with Anansi. Oh, wait, hold
Okay.
on. My wife was watching downstairs and she realized I forgot the books there. This is 1996 by Sarah Peters.
Hmm.
It was published in 2013 by House of Anansi. And she has such an incredible sense of voice. And it's a voice that's very close to, I think, my own, or, where I grew up. She's also from Nova Scotia. So she's from the same town as me. And there was a kind of a tonal sensibility that I think also gave me a way in, because those are two things I was looking for: a rhetoric and a tone of voice that were natural. And I think that those two books kind of echoed in my brain in a way that made me receptive to that kind of eureka moment when those lines did come in. And those first four things, or those four things that I just read, were the first four bits of the book that I wrote in
Hmm.
that order. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting too. Rose Leonard in the chat already mentions there's a claustrophobic feel to it, and that's really where the tension comes from. You feel sort of trapped in the narrative in the same way you are trapped in the narrative that you're telling. There's a way that because the sentences never end, like it's a book, it's one poem you read in one sitting, but you don't even get a chance to like take a break and like walk away. And there's a real sort of emotional power in that. And I think and that format works well too. How did you come up with that with the semicolons and the thing never ending?
um, because the period just looked wrong.
Hmm.
you know, it didn't make sense. And a comma didn't make sense either as punctuation. I needed to separate the phrases and the syntax. Someone had told me at one point, never use semicolons in a poem, that it was the most horrible punctuation. And so I guess I took that as a little bit of a gauntlet being dropped.
Hmm.
It's like, I can do that. And I do like the semicolon. I think it's a remarkable piece of punctuation in terms of the way it can conjoin and separate ideas and phrases. Um, and originally I was thinking, I could end it on a period, but I was like, but it doesn't really end, right? I mean, there's a kind of a resistance to an ending,
Hmm.
right? And I wanted the narrative to be self-reflexive, right? So, I don't need to end the book with any kind of, uplifting thing that is normally expected of like the misery memoir, where, the classic sort of like, I don't know, child abuse story or bad marriage story or whatever that sort of ends with, I suffered, but I was brave and I overcame. And, that's just not how life works.
Hmm.
That's just a narrative trope. And I, I don't like that kind of architecture in a story. And so I didn't want that to even be implied by a period.
Hmm. Yeah, well, it really it works perfectly for the subject matter. Let's keep reading from the book. Page 19 is where we want to pick up next.
Okay. Because the room is the room on the top floor of a house in Virginia where we live for a year until we move. Because the guest is there. And it's not my smelly aunt, but my father's best friend. Because I am 10 and I have no friends. because he says he wants to be my friend, because he invites me to come to his camp, and my parents say yes, because we are moving again, so it's really convenient for everybody, because when I talk, he actually listens to what I say, because he invites me up to his room to sit with him on the queen-size bed with its light pink spread, because the bed contains the four of us, the two that are here and the two in the mirror, because we watch ourselves being watched by each other, and he makes it seem hilarious, because I tell him about a girl I like, and for once, no one laughs, because he asks me if I want to know what a vagina feels like, and I suddenly really do, because he offers to show me, but only if I promise not to tell. And so I promise, which is easy since what he's offering is what I want, or at least what I think will be amazing. Because when it happens, I am literally amazed. Because his hand moves faster than any hand should move. It's like I'm leaving the earth, like the earth is not a real thing anymore. Because it's over as soon as it starts. And when it burns, he tells me, this pain is the sharpest part of pleasure. Because you glimpse yourself in the mirror, sprawled across the lap of a bearded man whose hands grace your neck, your legs, your chest. Because where there was skin, now there is rupture, and no one can see it but you. So your promise must be the glue that binds this new body to the rest of you. Because dinner is ready, and it's time to move. Because your mother is calling you. Because your father is calling you. Because it's time to move. Because the room is the cabin of a plane that carries me to him. Clouds falling up like rain in reverse as the plane descends. Because the room is an island where dawn is waiting. Because the fog is heavy and the ground arrives with a bump. Trees materializing out of the mist and the slick runway screaming back as its engines grind to a halt in Sydney, Cape Breton Island. A 3-hour drive from the Margaree Valley, where Dawn's camp nests deep in the hills that ring the valley floor. A place called Forest Glen, far away from electricity and cars, parents, and their rules, where boys can run naked and play Indian. Because for months, this was all I looked forward to. And the 15 minutes it takes the plane to come to a stop on the tarmac, the extra 5 to grab my backpack and file down the narrow aisle to the door, descend the steps to the wet asphalt, and walk the remaining yards to the terminal where Dawn waits on an orange seat studying a map of an island, half a dozen boys slouched about him like restless dogs, ends in a moment of silence. Because arrival is always accompanied by silence. Because I am new to this camp, and the others clearly aren't. Because still more are coming, which means more waiting, more staring at my feet, more hands to shake.
And that was another section from Because, Memoir by Joshua Mensch. And let's keep going. Since it's such a narrative book, I think we should read more sections in a row without breaking them up. Let's go to the 1990 section you wanted to share too, starting on page 29.
Okay. Yeah. Because the room is not a room, but a bathroom stall where your enemies have installed you, or rather, reinstalled you for the 5th day in a row. Because your stupid nose is bleeding like an open faucet. It does this randomly. And you've already clogged the toilet with an entire roll of paper. Because the bowl is overflowing now, and soon there'll be shrieks from the girls doing their own hiding in neighboring stalls. Because this is a school you go to, where you eat lunch in the library, where it's quiet, discreetly stuffing down the sandwich your father made for you. Because you can't stay here forever. When the bell rings, there is still the long hallway, its endless rows of lockers. Because the room is not a room, but a phone call. The principal at my school has concerns. Ran a background check and turned up reports from a camp where Dawn worked 10 years earlier, alleging impropriety with children, mostly minors from broken homes. Retribution, Don said later, for his complaints that the kids weren't being fed enough, weren't given clean clothes. You know me, he said. I'm always fighting for the interests of our youngest citizens. Because Don is my father's best friend, and mine too. Because school sucks. Because Don doesn't ask for more than the cost of my keep to homeschool me. Because I've already been in his care and deny everything when my father quizzes me about his behavior, asks if Don has ever touched me down there. Because I beg to go. Because Don's cabin is quiet and we can read Plato and track animals through the forest. Because he likes me, which is really nice of him. Because of history, which goes back forever between friends. Because even when I ask him about it later, say, Don, do you do this to the others too? He looks shocked and says, no, no, there's only you. Oh God, there's only you.
Yeah, so in that section, we see this line your father asks. He asks if Don has ever touched you, and you say no, and so that implies that he had worries and wondered about it. And the whole book brought me back. I was sort of on the fringes of something like this in kindergarten. I was at a Catholic elementary school, or it's a whole school through grade 9, I think. And the principal there was molesting and abusing the kids, and he would bring them in for like corporal punishment, kind of in his office. And there was this way that sort of even at 5 years old, like I knew that something was wrong, like something was weird about it, that the kids would go there and be punished in a weird way. And I told my dad about it, and he came in and, told the principal that I was never going in that office or he was going to be hit, and that saved me from being part of it. And only later, years later, like when I was in my 20s, I remembered that and looked up the school and the principal, and he had been arrested eventually, like 5 years after I left. And the thing is, like, everybody sort of had this idea, but nobody acted on it or knew. Everybody was in this kind of denial, even though they had suspicions too. So how does that play into it? I mean, what are the things to look for if you're a parent worrying about this? What are the warning signs, and how do you get over that hunch that's just thinking it's just just something that's not really true, and you're just having this little worry in the back of your head, but then you let it go, like it clearly happens so many times and so often.
Oh gosh, I don't know really how to answer that. Uh, I don't really know what advice I could give for how to identify that. Uh, children are very good at hiding things. And it's, we think of children as kind of simplistic creatures with simplistic minds, and it's, should be enough to say, you can tell me, you can trust me, whatever, you won't get in trouble, as if that's the only cost benefit analysis that they're weighing. The principal, when I moved from public school, right, or state school in North America, as it's called, to a private school, right, to a so-called home school, which is what Don ran. And he was a licensed educator. I mean, his school was registered. But to make that transfer, the school principal and, authorities, they do the background check, they do check this, and the principal flagged these claims that had never resulted in any kind of charges being filed or court action. And so, of course, my parents asked, right? How do you not ask? How do you not follow up? But, for me, it was a pretty simple equation, right? It was stay in school where I could be bullied and have a miserable time, or go to this other school where I would get to read really interesting books and be in the woods and not deal with horrible other kids. And, the whole kind of molestation thing was just, something that I was in a way inured to already. It didn't really bother me. It was something that wasn't something I liked, but it was something that was, think about it this way. right? Think about how many people you know who stay in shitty jobs because you know what? A paycheck is a paycheck because you can get by. So when you're a kid, everything that you deal with, school, whatever, is your shitty job. And the same way people put up with shitty jobs in their regular lives, the same way kids will put up with shitty parents, shitty teachers, shitty everything, because they weigh the benefits. Like, what does it mean to disrupt this? Right? Like, you might have a total asshole dad, and then it's like, but do you want to go into child protective services? Do you want to end up in a group home? What are the consequences of shaking that up? Right? I mean, I think as people, we're fundamentally conservative and we're more afraid of what that change means, and to disrupt a status quo that we've gotten used to is very difficult. So how do you know if this is happening to your kid? I mean, look, if I would say warning signs, like, I guess I'm always on alert for people who are just like way too interested in kids. Like when people really like kids a little bit too much, and I mean, some people, they really like kids a lot and they're not perverts. It's like, it's fine, but do they isolate themselves with children? Do they try and get kids alone? Do they talk to kids on this weird level where it's like me and you conspiring against the other adults? Right? Is there a kind of I don't know, just I would guess I would say look for any vibes that remind you of a cult, right? Because that's essentially what you're doing, right? Like that's the child molesters are. I mean, like there are different kinds of child molesters, obviously, right? There's like your school principal who just used fear and authority. That's one way, right? That's like the classic kind of, I guess, like the Catholic priest approach. But then you have the seducer kind, right? The kind that create literally a culture around this, where they say, what we're doing is natural, this is normal, and there's historical precedent for this and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's just such an important thing to talk about, and it's something that it's such a difficult topic to talk about that we tend not to, and so it's a good thing to be discussing openly. Let's keep going with more poems from the book.
Okay. Any particular?
I don't. Do you want to move forward, or do you want to keep with that 1990? It's up to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's maybe page 45. I can read like the last part of that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Or actually, you know what though? If I read 41, sorry, people don't know what the page numbers are, but if I read page 41, that kind of gives you a sense of Don's wife, Lorna, who's totally crazy.
Yeah, she's a really interesting character too.
Yeah, she is interesting. She was so because I mean, this guy was married, right? Like it's not like we were actually alone there. His wife spent a lot of time in Toronto and she was out a lot, but she was also there a lot. But she had her own cabin. She lived in her own universe, man, So like that, the thing is she gave him legitimacy, right? He was a married guy, I wasn't going there just to be with this guy. There was also his wife and this whole thing, right? So what was her role in this? And actually this section was written in response to a question from my dad when he was like, what, because in the first draft, he was like, you don't even write about Lorna. What was her role in all this? All right, so here's Lorna. Because the room is a cabin surrounded by frostbitten trees, where torrents of white gather in furious gusts, get tangled in branches, or ram themselves into trunks. Because the wind is literally howling at the walls, where Lorna and I sit, sipping tea among scattered clothes, dirty cups, and jars of pee, waiting for the gale to pass. Because the outhouse is 50 meters away, and outside the wind whips ice into our faces. Because it's better to sleep with the tang of urine than go outside and fight the blowing snow just to relieve some tension. Because the room is thick with incense. Bunches of lavender hang from rafters, absorbing smoke from the tiny cones that smolder and ossify in a bowl on Lorna's desk, become fragile dust that explodes and settles on the sill of the frost-covered window every time one of us sneezes or coughs. Because it is deep winter, inviting meditation and sleep. Because Dawn is out with Jay, our new student taken on for the spring, getting groceries and making phone calls from the old rotary telephone in the schoolhouse. Jay to his mother in Montreal, Dawn to his tax advisor. Because Lorna sings the song of my name to me. My name fought a battle, and the walls came a-tumbling down. Because it wasn't his horn that felled the city, but his eyes. Through Joshua's eyes, God saw what Jericho had become and saw fit to shatter it. Because to see is to devastate. Because Lorna believes that science is a study of life, and that to study life, you have to look at life. Only in the natural world can the answer be found. Because Lorna had the potential to turn the world of cell biology upside down. And when Dawn tells me later that he wrote Lorna's dissertation after she had a nervous breakdown, he makes sure to point out that the core research was hers. Because Lorna believes it's not the observation of things, but their beings, their beingness that clues us into dimensions that exist beyond our single slice of the universe. Because Lorna wants to teach me how to meditate, how to block out thought, but not the senses, so that I too can feel the other bodies I have lived in. Because I imagine my previous lives stacked like sheets of paper, each one a story of who you were and how you got here. Because I beg Lorna to ask me about me the next time she talks to the voice of light, a woman in San Antonio, Texas, whom Lorna calls every few months to get patched through to God. Because God is not a man, but a highway along which all souls travel, occasionally falling off and dropping into lives like the ones we're in right now. Because sometimes the souls of lovers dive off the side of the highway, one chasing the other so that they can be together longer, only to end up brothers or on opposite sides of a war.
And that was another section from Because, the lyric memoir by Joshua Mensch. And if anybody has any questions for Joshua, please leave them in the chat windows on Facebook or YouTube. I'm watching both. We already had a question from Monica Dobos, who she says, of course, the names are fictitious, but are you afraid of any repercussions for outing Don? Have you had any angst in that regard while writing and post-publication? And, having read the whole book, I assumed that that was his real name.
It is.
Yeah.
They're not fictitious.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And he was, I don't know, we'll maybe get to that or not, but he was eventually arrested. And so it's public. Yeah.
Before this book was published, I spent a lot of time on the phone with Norton's lawyers, because they didn't want to get sued, right? They needed to know that this stuff was real and that they would be able to defend that if there was a lawsuit or whatever. And so, their court records, there's newspaper articles, there was enough, kind of evidentiary stuff that who he is and what he did is a matter of public record. There's no slander. And the rest is, up to the sort of the vagaries of memory, right? And the foibles of memory. So that was part of that. There was a concern about the initials, right? So the various other kids who are at that camp are indicated only by initial. And so there was also, due diligence around making sure that they weren't identifiable, especially since they were, they're people who maybe don't want their story told, and certainly it wouldn't be my place to tell their story. And that's one of the things, somebody mentioned earlier that it feels very claustrophobic. It's part of the literary design, but it's also part of the sort of the architecture of necessity of the narrative. One of the things about Dawn's camp, they're really well populated places. There were always a lot of people around, a lot of other kids. And reading the book, you might think it was just kind of only me all the time, but I couldn't write about those people. I couldn't tell their stories. That was an ethical line that I couldn't cross. So I had to kind of keep it focused on the character I could name.
Yeah. Well, it's really good of Norton to let you do that and use real names and sort of trust that. So many times I think, in things like fair use, just having to defend somebody legally is just a book's not worth that, and so they'll have all these restrictions on things that they don't need to be restricted. And so it's really good for them for standing behind you and having lawyers to talk to and things like that.
Well, I
Yeah.
guess it's okay because the lawyer, I looked at the website of the lawyer who was in touch with me on Norton's behalf, and on our website, she's a super lawyer.
Oh,
So literally, like that's it. She says super lawyer. So
well,
I guess
I
it's
guess they know
covered.
how to pick them.
Right.
um, so, what about just the repercussions from people reading the book? The guilt your mom experiences for having let that happen. She feels blame for it. Your sister's responses to it later when you tell her. Your father's some things that happen. All those things are personal. Personal family story. It's your story, and they're sort of on the periphery of it. Did they do what was their reaction, and did you worry about that, and did you worry about Lorna reading the stuff too?
Well, I don't care what Lorna thinks. Or gone.
Mm-hmm.
Who's not in jail anymore. I
Oh, he's
mean,
not really. Oh man.
no, no, no. He lives in New Mexico somewhere.
Oh wow.
Uh, uh, yeah. I mean, I don't care what they think. I don't know if they've come across the book. People have asked me like, "Have you sent it to him?" I'm like, no. Uh, my parents and my sisters, yeah, I mean, I worried about that. But at a certain point, I had to be a little bit ruthless. I didn't, I don't think that I was unfair and or gratuitous, but they were adults, at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? They were adults in my lives, and I think that being adults kind of made them a little bit fair game. Um, they may disagree with me on that. I mean, my older sister, I was a little worried what she would think. And she wasn't entirely pleased. She was very generous
Mm-hmm.
about the book. I mean, um, she did support it, and she's one of my favorite people in the world, but she's also a very powerful personality in my life. And I couldn't let her see that manuscript before it went out. Um, because she probably would have told me to cut those scenes that she was in, and
Mm-hmm.
they were important for the book. And in part because she's an avatar for a lot of other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? That get kind of packaged into a perspective, a kind of instinctual perspective that's totally understandable, right? So like, there's a point where, she's sort of recalling a conversation with a friend of hers, is saying, like, aren't you worried? Like, what if he turns out to be a pedophile, right? Because this is a belief, right? You get molested, you become a molester, right? It's kind of causal thing. Um, and it's not to say that there is no causation. I think it may work that way for some people, but it's not inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a concern that's understandable to express. But she's not the only person who's expressed that concern. I remember once I was at a Thanksgiving, and there was this couple from Texas. It was in Prague. I was at a buddy of mine's house, and there was like this couple from Texas, and they had this like newborn kid. And this one lady was like, well, I would never let anyone who'd been molested near my kid. And then just like in the deepest of ironies, asked me to hold her kid while
Oh
she
wow.
went to go do something. And I was just like, but it's like, this is, the culture kind of trains people into that. And this is why it's an embarrassing thing to talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a really there's so much shame around this. Like you think about like women won't report rapes, right? Because of what it says about you as a person, because of the acknowledgement of that vulnerability and all that kind of stuff. And I think for men, it's even more difficult, but in addition to the sort of the, you know, uh, so-called like emasculating shame or whatever that comes with like the fact of having been a child and been vulnerable to the predations of adults, which is just it's a little bit ridiculous to be ashamed about that, but that shame is part of the culture. There's also the additional shame and embarrassment from all the narratives that encase that,
Mm-hmm.
partly because of the excuses that people who get caught doing that kind of stuff make, like, well, it's not my fault, i was
Mm-hmm.
i was busted, and all this sort of, right, that kind of builds this kind of narrative. So there's a kind of scarlet letter that you wear, acknowledging that. When I wrote this thing, I was like, I know I've got a good book here. I've got a really good piece of poetry. And my artistic ego was like, get that out into the world. But another part of me was just like, I am making a mistake,
Mm. Do you have any?
and that's what my parents were worried about.
Mhm.
That's what my mom was worried about. She's like, she was worried that I was making a mistake, that I was putting out something out there in the world that could like harm me professionally or whatever. It wasn't just about her embarrassment. It was just her being clear-eyed about the way society works and views things.
Mhm.
And also, she's someone who also has a great sense of, you know, a great understanding of shame, partly just, her generation of women, her
Mhm.
culture, she's, from upper Canada, she's, raised in an immigrant community in Ontario in a deeply Catholic culture, right? I mean, just think of the layers of shame that she would be aware of. And, you know, when the publicity started around the book, the publicist from Norton was like, well, do you have any hometown newspaper we could put a notice in? And I asked my mother if she knew anybody at the hometown newspaper, and she was just like, nope.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going there.
Hmm. Do you? Are there any ways in which you feel like it might have been a mistake to publish it after the fact, or is it just something that you're proud that you did and it worked well? Or were there any downsides to getting it out?
Uh, I don't know. You know, yeah, I mean, I guess there were like some downsides. Like, I mean, there were points where I was like, this was a bad idea,
Hmm.
you know. This is just kind of too much information. I had naively assumed that the literary power of it
Hmm.
would would be enough, right? That people would be like, wow, that was a horrible story, but I was really into it because it's so well written, right? I mean, people like to talk about, the soul of the artist or the life of the artist. I'm more interested in the mechanics of the artist,
Hmm.
right? The incredible feat by which some artists pull off an ability to make you care. And when I was on the book tour giving readings afterwards, nobody wanted to talk about the poems or how they were, how it was written or the literary kind of aspects to it. People wanted to talk about the subject. I mean, totally understandably, right? I mean, it's a really potent
Hmm.
subject matter. And, I was of two minds about that. On one hand, I was like, well, I guess that's a measure of success, right? A lot of people who don't read poetry read this and wanted to talk about it, wanted to talk to me about it.
Hmm.
So that somehow the poetry worked. The writing was so transparent. It was like they weren't even aware that they had read something that was a literary construction, right? So that's a kind of successful thing if people are able to access the story so immediately
Hmm.
and so viscerally. On the other hand, I had the bruised ego of the artist was like, but recognize the art, right? Like, a lot of work went into this. This is something that I constructed. So, it's a little bit kind of both, but I mean, it's out there. It is what it is. I mean, I can't reverse engineer a life I've already lived,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the what if hypotheticals I would get after readings. People would say, well, do you think that if you had done or if, right? I would get a lot of these kinds of questions. And it's like, I can't, this isn't like a television show. Like, what if America had become, Nazi?
Hmm.
Like this. It's not a Philip Roth speculative fiction. I can't do that. I have the life that I've lived, and so the book is out there, and I have to, accept that fact. And I was proud of the fact that I pulled off what I'd pulled off. I was very proud to have it published with Norton, which was a press I admired, and that they had you know, done such an incredible job with it. And my editor, Jill Bilowski, just had a lot of faith in the book. I
Hmm.
was not a typical candidate for a large New York publisher. I had no previous publications. I didn't even live in the United States. Everything kind of was against her publishing that or accepting that book, but she really believed in the manuscript
Hmm.
and that it had merit and took that gamble. And then Trump was elected and the whole conversation changed. So it's not like the book got a ton of attention anyway, so I sort of like dodged any kind of major attention that I might have gotten simply because like the whole lens of the entire world shifted to entirely other concerns, right? So we went from a kind of Me Too to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it definitely, I mean, the book great on Jill and Norton for publishing it, but it has the feel, just the weight of history in it. It's one of those books that should be on reading lists, especially anybody addressing these kind of topics. But there's this, a lot of books are published that, they're fun to read. They have little insights. They make you think a little bit. They're enjoyable, but then they kind of go away. And this is the kind of book that really has such staying power because it's such a powerful topic, so well done. So thanks again for writing it and sharing it. I want to talk about more things outside of the book. So let's finish out with like one last section from the book, and then we'll talk about your life outside of this.
Okay. Let me read section that's got a little more beauty in it. Yeah, I'll read this. This is maybe a good place to end. It's about midway through the book.
What page?
Page 60.
Okay.
Kind of gives you an idea of the beauty of that place, in addition to all the terrible stuff and why I was there and the kind of mythologies that it involved. Because the room is not a room, but a small clearing deep in the forest, halfway up the mountain that rises behind our cabin. Because I am alone here, having hiked farther into the hills behind Don's cabin than I've dared to before. Because I didn't tell anyone at camp where I was going. I could stay out here all night, maybe even forever, and not see another person again. Because even this lost, I know I'm not alone. I feel the eyes of animals upon me, feel even the eyes of old Indian ghosts. Because my skin is untempered by the weather, my spirit untested by a night without walls, without a roof, without blankets, with only the fire I'd have to make myself, with no one else. I question my ability to survive, and it annoys me. Because this is a story I read to myself. A young brave who goes to the top of a mountain for 3 days and 3 nights to become a man, who has visions, who talks to his spirit animal, who soars over his village and sees his sisters down by the river and his mother hard at work, who sees the woman he will marry and the child they will have together, who will be his apple, who sees his entire future and how short the path is, both behind him and ahead of him, and resolves to live all of it, no matter what happens to him. Because it is a child's story, but I still want to be in it. Because there is peace in these woods, too. And when I close my eyes, I can hear the trees whispering, can hear the insects chewing and trunks creaking, and the drumbeat of birds flitting through the underbrush. Because I wait until the late, low sun's fingers ignites the forest litter, setting fire to carpets of moss, blazing fallen logs and crumbling stumps, until the ferns glimmer like fingered parasols, lighting even me with an ember of flame. Because this is the moment I need to become someone else. Because time doesn't stand still, and neither does the sun. Because soon it will be dark and difficult to find my way back. Because the forest is growing denser and scarier, even as the sky breaks into colors more beautiful than any I've ever seen before. Because the sky is so gorgeous, I can't look away, can't bring myself to climb back down the boulder that lets me see clear across the valley. Because I want to stay. I need this vision. I need to know what my spirit animal looks like, what my future has to say. Because I sit on that rock until the sun crashes down into its own dirty rainbow, and the hills across from me go black.
And that was another section from Because, the lyric memoir by Joshua Mensch. Yeah, thanks again for sharing this book, Joshua. But you
Okay.
are, you work as a business analyst, and you are the founder of Body Literature, which we mentioned before. What has been your journey through poetry? Where has poetry's place been in your life? Was it something that you did when you were young? Is it something that you always wanted to do? Or is it something that you found along the way? And how does the business and the poetry intertwine in the choices you've made moving through life?
Um, you know, I've loved poetry for a long time. I mean, I think that even before I was aware of poetry as a thing, it was the music of language that made me gravitate towards certain books, um, and the way images work in the mind. Um, the first piece of poetry I remember consciously reading, my mother put a book of Dylan Thomas's selected poems in my hands when I was a teenager, and it was just, mesmerizing. I was obsessed. And then I remember when in middle school when we started reading Shakespeare, um, I was obsessed with that. That I was one of the few kids in the class who just didn't feel tortured by it. I loved it. And like a lot of teenagers, I wrote horrible poems. Um, a friend of mine actually, like from high school, I'd been in touch with in like decades, sent me a photograph after this book came out. And I didn't know this. It was from the high school yearbook. And he's like, they have that like little thing under your picture, like, what do you want to do in life? And I'd put apparently to be a poet. And he's like, well, I guess you did that. So it was like, it's always kind of been there, but along the way I had to learn how to write. And before that, I had to learn how to read. And I had really good teachers and really good friends. And then later on, when I finished school and, uh, I was living in Prague, I was living in Europe. Um, I felt very isolated from the landscape of the literary world in America, partly because there was no access to magazines and stuff. And I made friends in the city. Um, and at one point, they came up with the idea of starting a literary magazine and asked me to join in. So I'm not the founder of Body, I'm a co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
I started it with Chris Crawford and Stephen Delbos, a little over 10 years ago. And our idea was to make an online magazine that was for free, to charge no submission fees, all the things that annoyed us, right? So like we didn't have access to print journals.
Mm-hmm.
The few online journals that existed at that time were kind of bad. They were either like print journals, they would kind of throw up a bunch of stuff every few months and it would just sort of sit there,
Mm-hmm.
or it'd just be like a few samples from the print journal. So our idea was to do something that was like somewhere between a fashion magazine and a news magazine. And we came up with this architecture, this slider and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in a technology company. I still work in a technology company, but that meant I had access to resources and I had run technical projects for years. So I knew how to build a digital product, and I was able to get some colleagues of mine at work to help me build the website, and that was Body. And I, had a really good web designer and presented it to the guys and was like, what do you think? And they were like, this is cool, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just spent a few months just hitting everyone we knew up for good work. And then we launched it. And then we were just on a tear for years, every day, just publishing and just made that thing that we were missing in our lives. And for our 10-year anniversary, we got a new web designer, this really talented guy named Miroslav Sidor, who also works with me. He completely, our architecture was so old. The site was getting so slow, and he just made us a completely new one, did a really brilliant job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a collaborative project. And I work on it with Chris and Steven, but also my sister Jessica is our art editor. Mike Stein is our fiction and translations editor, brings in incredible work from around Europe and around the world. Jan Sickman started out as our poetry translations editor, and
Hmm.
we've worked with like so many people as well. Francesco was one of our guest editors, and we're going to have more guest editors going forward. So it's a really collaborative venture, and it's part of the fabric of my life, and it's something that keeps me sane in addition to the going to work.
Hmm.
My job is fun too. I really, I like my job. I like the people I work with there. It's very creative, and we build cool technology stuff. um so my life's, your life exists in a continuum. It's not like you're putting things in boxes. I'm at work. I don't spend time on social media. I always have a file with a poem open. When I want to take a break from whatever task I'm doing, I'll work on my poem for a little bit.
Hmm.
And I'm home. Sometimes I don't want to like finish that poem or work on the magazine. I procrastinate by doing boring stuff in Excel for work.
Hmm.
It's all interchangeable. It's all my life.
Yeah. Brian or Ryan McGregor asks, has the whole process from writing to publication of your book changed you as an editor, and the way you read, edit, or select other writers' work? Has that process influenced you at all?
Not really. Being a magazine editor, I mean, the magazine business and the book business, I think, are really different.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I think that as someone who writes and submits work, sends work out, I'm definitely sensitive to what it means to be in the position of submitting myself to others, like literally,
Hmm.
like what the word submit, what that means and what that implies, and the power dynamics that are there. So that's informed me, and the submitting a book was its own crazy kind of ordeal. And I had a really weird route to getting this book published.
What was that route? I
Um,
mean, I was kind of curious because I've never seen anybody whose first book ended up on Norton. How did you find that?
um, well, so a teacher of mine at the University of Maryland, the late Stanley Plumley, I'd sent him the manuscript, and he'd responded kindly about it. And when we met up at one point, a couple of years later, I asked him what he thought. And he said that he thought it would be a good fit for Norton, which
Hmm.
is his publisher, and that I should send it to his editor. And I was like, well, can you give me your email? And he's like, you're resourceful. You'll figure it out.
That's
So I
funny.
did.
Uh huh.
And I sent it to her. And of course, I sent it with like his name as the subject line, to catch her
Hmm.
attention. And she responded within a couple of days and said, let's talk. And then it was, half a year of waiting for a decision. And she had a number of concerns, which were like, I don't live in the States. How would I support the book?
Hmm.
This was pre-pandemic. So, this idea of these Zoom and these online things hadn't really taken off at that point. So I committed firmly to being available and traveling, and I did that.
Hmm.
Um, I think she had a little bit of concerns about this being her first book. But I think she was reassured by the endorsements that I had from other poets on her list, like Stan, um, who just, signaled their appreciation for the work and that it had a place.
Hmm.
And I think that she's someone who's willing to take risks and took a risk.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was just, yeah, I lucked out getting an editor who believed in the book and having the support of people whose opinions were important to her, and that I think kind of balanced out some concerns that might have been had.
Hmm.
So it was really great. But to answer the other guy's question, because I do think that's a really good question, is look, all of us who edit, we also write, we submit. And so for us, our practices as editors responding to submissions are really informed by that. One thing we hate is magazines that take like 9 months to respond, or a year, or they just don't. you'll go into submittal and notice that your submission's just marked close at some
Mm-hmm.
point years later. It's just terrible. And magazines that I've always admired are like the ones that respond really quick, like Three Penny Review within days.
Mm-hmm.
And so our approach is to do that. Really, like, I mean, we could respond sometimes within hours of when people submit because we're online, we're at work, we're all office rats.
Mm-hmm.
We see these things come in, and it's like our social media during the day is to like read submissions and vote and talk about stuff as it's coming in. Um, so we try and get back to people really quickly, and to have the courtesy of not wasting people's time,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that's maybe the best answer to that question.
Yeah. So now you've published this book, which is such a weighty and important book. Do you find yourself having trouble with a follow up, like what to do next? Now that I mean, you have this is like a project of a book that's your story that you had to tell, and so do you have that sort of existential dread of like what do I do? What are you
Yeah.
working on now? Is there anything? Are there projects? Are there just poems that you're what's the situation for new work?
Um, yeah, just writing poems and um, I'm so Catholic in my reading. I read like a lot of stuff. And so I have a lot of directions of influence, and that makes it difficult to formulate a coherent manuscript, in a way that where the poems kind of hang together in a way that makes sense. I mean, Stan was one of these people who would always tell me, it all sounds like you, just, put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm reviewing 5 books now, for our books in brief. And, there are books that have just come out. And one thing I noticed, they are all thematically either unified or they're book length projects. I mean, this is a kind of mode now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, I think we're a ways away from the days of just sort of like collections that people put together. This is my best work, and here's some kind of organization, and
Mm-hmm.
there you go. So that's been difficult, settling on a kind of an idea of a project,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, I mean this is a hard book to follow up. I've given readings where I'll read a bit from the book and then I'll read some other stuff, but people clearly want me to just go back to the book. Like
Uh-huh.
that's this kind of weird anchor, and it's been difficult to move past that. Um, but I think I'm getting there. I'm starting to get poems that are moving in a kind of a direction. That poem, "An Act of Sabotage," that you published
Mm-hmm.
in the fall issue, is one of those poems that I think do reflect where my concerns and my thinking are now, which are a lot about the the interior world and the kind of the relationship between the self and the world and how that relates. Which I don't know, maybe that's all poems do that, but
Mm-hmm.
in my own particular way, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, what I find usually, and I think it's interesting because I think part of the reason we have project books now is because they're easier to market. As a publisher, you can say, this is what the book's about, and it sort of follows this easy path when you have that. But I think that poets always have sort of the things that are itching at them in their subconscious, the things that they keep writing about over and over again, they're trying to figure out. And so when you look at the poems all together, there does, themes emerge that we weren't even aware of because we're sort of have these little obsessions with certain thoughts and ideas that nag at us. And so I know I'm really excited to see what you have next when it comes up as a collection. You have one poem, Muscle Memory, that you sent, a newer one. Do you want to close out because we're out of time for this segment? Do you want
Okay,
to close out and read that one?
sure. Yeah, here's a newer poem. Muscle Memory. Down in the basement, my friend was trying to make me lift heavy things. "Breathe out," he shouted. "Breathe in." He wanted me to give birth to myself in the womb of a building built decades ago for migrant workers. He wanted me to emerge as a moth from its chrysalis into the night air, renewed and newly dangerous. All day the sky had sat like a giant unblinking eye, moving its gaze from horizon to horizon. I had thought, visiting my childhood bedroom, that if I could just sit as I had sat then, looking at the same view from the same window in the same chair. My old dreams would come to me, and I would remember them and feel renewed. But the trees had grown up, and the fields across the way were barely visible. How my dreams had raced across them. A flock of ravens landed in the trees just then, and I realized my dreams too had changed. Black as night, they pulled all the world's color inside them. Deeply secretive, they made sure to look the same. Even I, whose dreams they'd been, could no longer tell them apart. In the basement with my friend, where the buzzy weight of fluorescent lights pressed down upon us, I breathed out and out and out until a new me finally emerged, damp-winged. In the wide open field of a parking lot, bathed in orange light, I heard my old dreams croaking in the trees, harassing each other, forgetting, then remembering, then forgetting.
Yeah, another great poem. That's a new poem. We get to experience Muscle Memory by Joshua Mensch, today's guest on the Rattlecast. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you. A really powerful book. It's one of the most memorable books you could read. And really, I recommend everybody check out Body Literature, too, at bodyliterature.com. Great website for poetry, and send your poems in that way. But Joshua, thanks again for being a guest. It's been great.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
Yep, take care.
Bye.
Once again, that was Joshua Mensch. You can find his website and this book and more things at joshuamensch.com. That's JOSHUAMENSCH.com, just like it's spelled on the book, joshuamensch.com. All right, so now we're going to take a quick break and go to our open or prompt lines. I should say, if you're enjoying what you watched, please do click the like button and share, and make sure you're subscribed. We are also a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry and unaffiliated with any other organization, which I'm supposed to say every time. I forgot to say that at the beginning. So we are going to move on to our open lines, though. And it's the prompt lines, I should say. And how it works is this. I have to put up, I think I didn't include, I have to update the slide. Hang on a second. I go to, not that one, but we have to go to Joshua's episode slide, which is right. Where did I put it? Hang on one second. Sort of my date. I think I mislabeled it too. Where did I save it? Well, anyway, I will just say then, so I don't have the slide. We'll put up last week's slide, but this is the wrong one. So this week's prompt was not this. It was write an epistolary poem, a letter to someone you are thankful for. And so that was a prompt for this week. But how it works is you email that to promptlines@rattle.com. That's promptlines@rattle.com. Email your poem there so I can show it on screen as you read it. Share whatever you'd like as long as it fits that prompt. And then join me on the Zoom. And I'm putting the Zoom links on the screen right now. I'm going to put them in the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. So there you go. Join me on the Zoom only if you'd like to share poems. If you just like to listen and enjoy other people's prompt poems, sit tight right where you are. But if you would like to share, join me on the Zoom. And I'll be right back with more poetry. And I'll fix this slide too in the meantime. Hang on. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. The new correct slide is now on the screen temporarily. And again, the prompt was to write an epistolary poem, which is another word for a letter poem, to someone you are thankful for, a kind of Thanksgiving type prompt. We have our prompt poems editor here, Katie Dozier, about to sip her coffee. Hey, Katie, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. My coffee is cold, but the poetry talk is awesome, so that works.
Well, it definitely is let's see. Yeah, mine's cold too, but it was warm before, so that counts for something.
That does, definitely.
So, what did you do with the prompt this week?
It's funny because, to be honest, I kind of thought this was a bit of a gimme prompt. Like, I thought it was an easy prompt, and that it was just like a nice light one for, around Thanksgiving and everything. And I actually kind of struggled with it, in part because I was thinking about the difference between, being thankful and grateful and how they're often used as synonyms, but to me, they're not really synonyms. So, obviously I'm very thankful, but really I'm grateful for you. So this poem could have gone there. I've written many poems like that, and that's not where this one particularly went. This is inspired by a last-minute Starbucks run I took yesterday.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
In some colder Texas weather than I'm used to. Okay. To the man pressure washing the sidewalk outside of Starbucks. You're folded into a gray hoodie on this late fall day that's as cloudy as cold foam. I brush by you, my hands warm in the pockets of my Black Friday white coat. Wind spits your water on my cheek. Eek. Why do it now when the drive-thru has the whole building surrounded? Inside with the other Sherpa coats, I see the spray paint, the words in red. It doesn't matter what they said. Hate sounds the same in any language. There are toddlers that never stack bricks, only topple them. And what'll become of all these empty coffee cups? Now the wind pumps up flakes of red right along with your water, but this time it's the spray from a whale. And this is the part where I thank you for how you smiled at me when you found a shot of the sun, all at once realizing that you could make rainbows.
Great poem. And cold in Texas? I don't know. I've never experienced that.
It's like you have to wear a light jacket. Very cold.
Gosh, that's terrible. But yeah, I had trouble with this prompt too, because I think, the way I try to write or tend to write, I try to find something I don't know that I'm writing about. Like I try to enter some kind of, subconscious thing. And this was so directed that I found myself like, how do I write something interesting about something that I already know? Like that I already, I could say thank you to people, and I try to, but how does a poem come to be from that? It was much more challenging than I thought it was going to be too. And yeah, so we'll see my poem in a second, but we were talking about some of the Joshua Mensch mentioned book reviews. And on the poetry space coming up on Thursday, we are going to be talking about criticism in poetry, right? So what do you have as a preview for that? The poetry space, once again, is our little show on Thursdays, and that we do, and we sit around for an hour talking about a topic, and you picked the criticism as a topic for this week. So what are we going to talk about on Thursday?
I'm excited to explore the importance of it. Is it really important to have more? I feel like there's far-reaching literary criticism, but when it comes to poetry, we're really hesitant to be like, hey, this book of poetry could have been better. It was lacking in this. And we're so quick to do it with books. And I want to use that as a way to explore the validity of criticism and how maybe, just patting each other on the head and saying good poem all the time, maybe we should be doing more. How can we do more? How can we make poetry more far-reaching through criticism that I think is an important part of art?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to talking about that because I've tried to publish book reviews for so long. I've tried so many different ways to do it that never seemed to work. And there's reasons for that we'll talk about on the show. But I'm looking forward to that, Katie, on Thursday. And thanks for sharing your prompt poem. Hopefully we'll see you toward the end again for a little bit to see what next week's prompt is. But thanks. Speaking of
Definitely, thanks.
All right. Yeah, that's Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor, coming live from the Woodlands, Texas, with her poem this week, which once again was to the man pressure washing the sidewalk at Starbucks. Now mine, I kind of talked a little bit about it in the episode what I was going to write about, which is my dad, sort of getting in the way for me, which he did a bunch of times. And there's actually something that I want to write I have a whole book sort of project about, and it's hard to get. It's hard to get through it or hard to do it. It's hard to get a grasp on what I want to do with that. I've been trying to write about it for a long time. But so I decided to take a very specific little anecdote that could have gone into it. And I made a little tiny triolet, because a triolet is a fun little poem. So here's my triolet about this topic, a little thankfulness triolet. Here we go. This is triolet for my dad in first grade. I thought you let me walk alone to school. I never saw you there 2 blocks behind. So grown up, so brave, so super cool, I thought. You let me walk alone to school. The other kids were dragged by hand like mules, but I was free, at least inside my mind. I thought you let me walk alone to school. I never saw you there 2 blocks behind. So that was a little triolet for my dad, who he did. We lived in a sort of a rough neighborhood at the time, and I thought I was so awesome for being able to walk. All of my friends, I was like bragging to them, but really my dad was there hiding behind bushes, making sure I got there and didn't, nothing happened along the way as I passed the crack house and stuff. So anyway, that is my triolet for my dad. Let's see what everybody else has this week to share. Let's go to Nivi first, because Nivi is first in line, and I'm not sure if you're at work right now. No, it's after work now, right, Nivi? How you doing?
Well, it's just 3 minutes past midnight for me.
Oh,
Hi,
it's
Tim.
very late.
Hi,
Yeah.
Kitty. Hi, everybody.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad you could join us. As always, it's always fun
So
talking
did
and
I.
sharing your poems. And thanks for
Actually
staying up
managed to
late.
catch an entire show live.
Yeah. So what do you have to share?
I have a prompt poem, but a sneaky approach to a prompt poem because I couldn't think of a single person that I wanted to thank because there's like so many. So I decided to thank poetry, the muse of poetry, for want of a better word, for giving me and all of us the gift, as we would like to call it, to be able to share our thoughts out. So that's what I've tried to do. Let's see if it actually worked.
Let's hear it.
Dear poetry. Dear poetry, in the quiet corners of my soul, your whispers found sanctuary amid the clandestine dance of words. I pen this letter with gratitude, inked in the language you bestowed upon me, a gift unfurling like petals in the dawn. You, poetry, are the alchemist of my beliefs, turning my tumbling thoughts into tuneful text. With every stanza, I'm reborn, a phoenix of expression soaring on the wings of metaphors. Through the tapestry of words, we converse a silent dialogue echoing in the chambers of creation. I am just a vessel charmed by your magic, grateful for the life that spills from the nib of my pen. So, thank you, poetry, for choosing me as one of your voices, for in the dance of syllables, I discover the symphony of existence. Yours, in ink and introspection, Nivi.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nivi. And definitely, poetry is something we should all be thankful for because it brings us all together, and across time and space too. It's really great. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep, and have a good night. Get some sleep. All right, it was Nivity to Karthik from India with Dear Poetry. Let's see. Let's go next. Douglas Silver is next.
Good morning, Tim. Morning.
Hey,
Strange
Douglas,
to say
yeah,
good morning
thanks for
to you
joining.
all.
Yeah, good to see
All
you.
of us on the West Coast here saying good morning still with coffee.
That's true.
Tim, I heard you and Katie say it was a difficult prompt for you all, but it was easier for me. I've been exchanging emails with Stacy Kleinmeyer from the Sun magazine.
Oh, yeah.
And this would have been like the last, the email I didn't write, the last one that I didn't write. I had it in my head. I didn't write it until now for this prompt. It's actually an epistolary haibun for Stacy Kleinmeyer. And if you have it, I'll go to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. She is the assistant editor of the Sun magazine. Dear Stacy, I know we joked about it. At least I think we were joking that maybe my most successful genre is writing letters to the editor after you accepted another one from me, the 6th you'll publish in 8 attempts. I like that ratio. Much better than with my regular submissions there and elsewhere, where it's more like the score in a one-on-one basketball game between me and LeBron James. I owe just a few points because he claimed he fouled me and I sank some free throws, and he's approaching triple digits. But I'm not giving up. Maybe this time, maybe the next one. And you mentioned that the very first novels were epistolary, and suggested I write a whole book of letters. Maybe I'll start it here, entitled Dear Stacy, and you could write the introduction. Just joking. Thanking you, Doug Silver. The piecemeal joy of not getting what we want, but glimpses of it piling up on top of one another. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doug. I think we can all relate to that, and there is a joy. You know, it's the pursuit of happiness, as they say, and the pursuit is there. You're not necessarily catching it, but getting close. And
the poems get a second chance when we come to places like this. Even the poems that get rejected, they get a second chance in open mics like this. So I appreciate that. Yeah,
excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was once again Douglas Silver with Dear Stacy. Hyben. Thanks for sharing that, Doug. Next, we have Monica Dobos.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Monica. Good
to
see you.
Be here. Such a great discussion. It was just amazing listening to Joshua, and I can totally relate to Katie when she said, well, it's hard to write positive poems, I feel. Not many out there. So this is my attempt. Mm-hmm. It's not a positive poem, but, you know, the mind goes wherever it wants to go. So, and I feel like it's definitely not done yet, but we'll see.
Yeah, I have it up. This is Dear Mashed Potatoes. Go ahead.
Dear Mashed Potato. Oh, wait. Oh, I thought I would see it here. Okay, hold on. Oh.
Yeah, I should say for anybody who's new, you do have to read your own version because the delay on the screen would mess you up otherwise. Yeah.
Okay. Dear Mashed Potatoes, we were centermost, right next to the poor spineless bird. Taking out the backbone saves big on cooking time, they say, although if you ask us, it looked more like blind spaghetti across the road. And the cranberry sauce that spilled all over the table helped in completing the accident scene. Kids didn't seem to care about us, though. He had serving after serving of you. Mom barely touched the green beans. Dad had peanuts with lots of wine. The sausage in the stuffing smelled like Mom smudged hell with sage, and when she aimed the rest of you at Dad for ruining the Thanksgiving tablecloth, she hit Mordecai, the parakeet, instead. And we got totally roasted. Imagine, we were not even throwing worthy. Now, don't fret, they took Mordecai to the vet, and he saved him. But guess what snack Kid packed for the waiting room? That's right, 3rd-degree burned pumpkin pie. He'd licked all of you off Mordecai first. Thank you for taking over Thanksgiving. Yours truly heard sweet potato casserole. P.S. Someone please take care of the kid.
That's a funny poem. Thanks so much for sharing that. Great Thanksgiving poem, too. Thanks, Monica.
Yeah, it's more like that. Yeah, more of a Thanksgiving poem.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. Always great to see you. It was Monica Dobos with Dear Mashed Potatoes. Next, Laura Berg is here.
Hey.
Hi, Laura. Good to see you.
I also have a non-human recipient of my thank you letter.
Uh-huh.
Diasporos, divine fruit. Who's out there juggling dozens of golden orbs under the big tent of sky? I see you, Persimmon the Magnificent, and I thank you. It might seem wrong in wartime to be writing a thank you note to a persimmon tree, but the tree shines and the words long to be written. Persimmon, your fruit floats in air the way spirit lanterns float on water. November's chill accentuates your sweetness. My eyes perch on your crown, peer like a grackles over glossy leaves, sea green, and I caw, caw. Persimmon, tell me your history. Tell me about your years among the Algonquin. Living here now, we act as if we own everything, when in fact we own nothing at all. I'd pick a basket of persimmons, luminous as Osage orange wood, to eat, share, or simply set in a bowl, still life. Leaves shed, your branches come into focus, reaching up like Devi's many arms. Without you, the garden would feel empty.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love the descriptions and sounds in that, Laura. Thanks for sharing that. It was a diaspiros and divine fruit. Am I saying that right? Diaspiros? Close enough.
It's the actual name of the tree. That's the technical name of the persimmon tree.
Yeah, well, beautiful poem for a tasty fruit. Thanks for sharing it. There's Laura Berg with Diospiros. Let's go to Brian O'Sullivan. Hey, Brian. Oh, I'm not hearing you. I think you're not on mute, but your mic's not picking up or something.
Weird.
There you go. We got you now.
Yeah? Can you hear me now?
You're good now. I don't know
Sound
what
like
it
the
was.
Verizon guy? Okay, cool. So I sent something that will sound like it probably was a poem that I have left over from a couple of weeks ago, but I promise I wrote it this week. It just, and it meets the criteria, I think. It just took extra inspiration from the prompt 2 weeks ago. And it is to my wife, Jen.
Okay, yeah, looking forward to it. Go ahead.
Okay. The end of the world is not the end of you and me. Dear Jen, on the night of the much heralded blood moon, you led me out the door to scan the sky. I gazed at you, you gazed up as if to scry, watching celestial signs for blight or boon. Then I aligned my gaze with yours, and soon we saw a silver shade to red on high. You said, "Well, Pa, you think the end is nigh?" I picked up a twig and puffed it like a loon, and answered, "I think the world unended, Ma. It's just us left in this tearful vale." The night was quiet enough to feel it true, that all had ended and only we transcended. We laughed. Thank you for this laughter that prevails, even when the whole world comes unglued.
Oh, that's such a sweet poem, dear Jen. Thanks so much for sharing that, Brian. I'm sure Jen's either not listening now or will listen later and appreciate that. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. The Brian O'Sullivan with "The End of the World is Not the End of You and Me." Let's see. Let's go next to Bishwajit Mishra.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, good to see you, Bishwajit. Yeah.
Good to see you too. I'm just trying to make do here. I normally work from home. I came to office. So I'm just doing
Well,
it on
great.
my
I'm
phone.
glad it works on your
Things
phone
didn't
too.
work.
Yeah, live from the office.
Yeah. It's just
So what do you have to share?
So I have a so-called prompt poem. It's a repurposed poem. It's called "The Missing Man."
Okay.
Do you have it?
Yep, I do.
I submitted it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have it right here. Yep.
So it's a reverse letter, like it's somebody writing to me. So you
Gotcha. Well, that's an definitely an interesting take on it. Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah. "The Missing Man, a magpie's response to a poem. You came by the other day and said a few things to me, asked questions too. I felt your call to see me again, and I came to the same field. Saw you walk by on a few other days, looking at me, hopping about, perhaps thinking about the poem you'd written about me. Then you stopped or changed your timings, as I don't see you these days. Was your curiosity about me just to write the poem? Then you came a couple times more until your curiosity petered out, as though you bought your news in a store? If so, what did you pay for it? I'm still here, the solitary magpie, if you're interested. You see me solitary mostly. I'm not alone though. I have so much to keep my company, including you. And there's more. If you keep seeing the way you saw me the first time, you'll find many more muses to send your imagination soaring like me. And all you have to give is your attention, yet nothing will be spent from you. I know you want to fly. Let me do that for you. While the plants breathe for you, you go and soar in your imaginations and go on living slowly and wholly for all of us.
Oh, that was excellent. I love that take on the prompt, reversing it and having it be a letter to you from something that you're thankful for too. That's a really neat, and I love the perspective too. Thanks for sharing that, Bishwajit.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sam.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye. And happy Thanksgiving to all of you belated.
Yeah, same here. Thanks, Bishopjet.
Thank you.
Bishopjet Mishra with The Missing Man, a magpie's response poem. Let's go next to Stephen Croft.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Stephen. Yeah, good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I didn't realize you were starting early this week, so came in late, and I just sent you my poem. Hopefully you got it.
Yeah, I have it right here. Thank you, Wallace Stevens. So an excellent topic, too, especially since we didn't really mention it, but I always get Wallace Stevens vibes from today's guest, Joshua Mensch, because he works like in business and, writing poems on his lunch break and stuff, just like Wallace Stevens was, the old insurance company. So yeah, good poem here to share today. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to go back and listen to today's Rattlecast because I came in late, but this is Thank You, Wallace Stevens. Thank you, Wallace Stevens, for explaining jars on hills in Tennessee, the mysteries of blackbirds and their entanglement in so much of life's meanings, how best to use a mind of winter, and that the only emperor is of ice cream. That by her singing, she was sea, and sea was she, how thus artifice makes order reality. Why the not quite magic of a blue guitar cannot satisfy a chorus's questions, can only give them a long-winded play, plucked variations of a thing yet to be made. Thank you for the enigmas of so much you know, dressed in the brightest lines since Keats. None of it makes the most wonderful sense now. Thank you.
A great thank you letter to Wallace Stevens, one of my favorite poets too. Thanks so much for sharing that, Stephen.
Okay, you bet.
Take care. Stephen Croft with Thank You, Wallace Stevens. Couple poets left on the lines. Andrew Tradinic is next. I think it's really early in the morning now for Andrew. Let's see.
Yeah, hi Tim.
Hey Andrew, thanks for waking up early.
It's 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. now, 10 to 6.
So did you wake up early enough to see
I wake up. I'm sort of on a bit of a break from work, so it's okay,
Well, thanks so much for doing that. I'm glad we have you.
Thank you. My poem is inspired by Dorian Locke's, and it's a letter to. Actually, it's very truthful. It's a letter to my mum who died 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, 21 years ago, and it takes some fragments from Dorian's poem to her mum and sort of if those of you who know the poem will recognize that, but it's a letter.
Yeah, well, I have it up. Go ahead and read it.
A letter to my departed mum, after Dorian Locke's letter to my dead mother. And Dorian's poem says, "Dear mother, I have tried. I think I know now what you meant when you said I'm tired. Dear fractured soul, dear innocent abroad, dear olive-skinned beauty with film star looks, time to apologize for when I expected too much of you. Dear champion swimmer, dear horsewoman, lover of nature and the wonders of our Great Barrier Reef, dear lost adventurer, dear domestic servant to your mother, dear mentoring older sister, dear runaway devoted niece. You voyaged to England, the old country, to flee from parents who cared for the strange, distant, vague one as best they knew. And you had with you letters of introduction from our Prime Minister. You were on a mission for years to save the children, you thought, as a healing pioneer, a physiotherapist, in the then new profession. Dear woman of the house, you foolishly married a man 2.5 times your age in that far country. Yet he turned out to be the keeper of your heart. Dear life of the party, dear intuitive pianist, dear ballroom queen, you could cook up a storm and entertain, an oddity, an unusual soul. drinker of strong tea, lover of fast cars and British racing green, golfer, gardener of roses, daffodils and geraniums. Dear astute denier, dear reckless prudent, twice in private physio practice with your shingle up for the elite, now widowed once when widows were called widows, keeping working against the odds of illness as department head or exploited worker, both. Dear receiver and giver of family kindness, you loved the tartans of Scotland, you knitted sweaters, you sewed clothes. Dear welcoming bigot, dear aloof convivial conversationalist, dear wise unaware, dear wounded healer, you were sharp as a tack, vague as a cloud, and you braved the world and ploughed through as though a single mum. Despite remarriage after returning home, your third baby, your daughter, due at 40 as you worked, and your new husband was around for 7 years more. It was a relief for him, you said, the end of his struggle, as he left you widowed for the second time. You missed his funeral in the stress of your own breakdown, and you wondered if he were really dead, as you'd missed your first daughters years before, when neonatal death was only spoken of in knowing looks as the evidence was whisked away. Dear grieving mother and widow who could not grieve, single mum widowed twice, dear profligate provident, dear victorious victim, dear integrated broken soul with sometime dark and scary eyes. Time to apologize for when I hurt you and for the anger of my youth. Dear lavish debtor, dear embarrassing loving school mum who brought me birthday cakes into school. And when we queued for Luna Park, caught in a rainstorm, you hugged me close at 10. And at 11, you visited kindness as I healed from our car crash. Dear confident struggler, dear hilarious crazy one, dear careless protector, dear oblivious perceiver, you worked when your baby was young. You worked with disabled children and in nursing homes. You worked hard and fiercely defended your girl from tides of chaos and struggle, returning from near ruin often to build and rebuild. I know now what you meant when you said later, I must sit down. And all these arrangements, the stress. I expected too much of you, but you laughed and did more than enough for us in those days.
Oh, what a sweet profile of your mother there, Andrew. And I love the refrain of the deer, the anaphora, perfectly aligned with today's guest with the because coming up in the poem too. That was a letter to my departed mom. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Andrew.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks. Very inspiring for Joshua. That was very bold of him to share his stuff. Thank you.
It definitely was. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, it was Andrew Trudinick with a letter to my departed mom. Okay, here we are, a new first-time caller. Sorry to make a first-time caller go last, but Suzanne Sunshower is here. She's got a poem. Let's see. Hey, Suzanne, how you doing?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. We can't see you. I don't know if you want to turn on the mic or the camera or not, but it's not on if you want to.
No, I wasn't prepared to be seen today.
Well, that's all right. No problem at all. So where are you calling from?
I'm in a little camper in the big woods in northern Michigan.
Ah, great. Northern Michigan. Excellent place to be calling from. And I have, let's see, I have your poem, but the file won't open for me. It says there's something wrong with the file, but we'll just listen to, if you want to read it, we'll just listen to the poem that you wanted to share. It's Late Autumn Suns. I see that, but I can't open it for some reason.
Sorry, it's a PDF file.
Yeah, I know. It says it's corrupted. I'm not sure why. That happens sometimes with like submissions. I'd never figured out what that even means, but it's okay. We'll just listen.
All right. Well, thank you. This is Late Autumn Sun, and it's for my. It's a prayer note for my son who passed away 2 years ago last week.
Well, I'm sorry for that.
So obviously I've been thinking about him. Steppenwolf Sunshower, 2003 to 2021. I released you as best as a loved one can, just when the last leaves began to fall. I set you on your endless journey just as I'm on mine now without you. An angel who'd earned his wings, you were the saint watching over me when I topped the far leafy hill to catch the last afros of red and orange blazing across the Michigan autumn sky. A fringe of fire, your halo. Even now, in what we call the dead of winter, I remember treetops alit in the crazy fall sun, and I nod with love, thinking, just a few moments more rays of sun. Yeah, you would have liked that.
Oh, what a beautiful,
Thank
touching
you.
tribute. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that with us, Suzanne. That was really moving, and I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Suzanne Sunshower with Late Autumn Sun, a really, really beautiful poem. All right. And then let's see. I think that wraps up the people who have the open lines. I figure we might have a short list of readers given the unusual time. A lot of people at work, people actually have to do that, I hear. But we do have a couple poems, poets that can't quite be here but want to read a poem or want me to share. So let's see, the poem for this week. This is Ted Bernal Guevara with Benediction. And this is a Dear Father Tank. It's two. And he didn't include a photo this time. Usually Ted includes a really interesting photo. This time we just have the poem, so let's use our imaginations too. This is Benediction by Ted Bernal Guevara. So let's give this a read. Dear Father Tank, we made a mess of your Volvo, but we were sons you never had and daughters you let alone to think for themselves. 7th grade was a porcelain sink you constantly used to wash your wide face in. We were the unblessed water and the Ajax soap, odorless to organize the exact steps of your day. We didn't know it then, but you were the scrub of our delinquencies. Thank you for applying the powder thick on the sponge. We didn't know you had it in you. That gentle look, that modest smile, all that circling strokes made us boys bald from head to back. I see the lacking on photos now. No hairs to shave, no blotches to dub. Even when we paired you up with sisters Glad's and her chin. You with a Gillette to her sparse goatee, unrequited love pressed in spiral notebooks. Thank you for ignoring this. Thank you for making the ridiculous unfunny. Thank you for cleansing our souls on a daily basis and tearing our lungs of would-be carcinogens. Thank you for detaching us from huge incinerator. Thanks for making us great dent pullers and great polishers of bumpers. Thank you for making us great appreciators of sweetest cars. Thank you for making us believers of sacrament and reconciliation. Thanks for dying in our time. Thank you for lying still. Thank you for making grief a time of self-reflection. That was great. Really playful and profound too. Their benediction for Dear Father Tank by Ted Guevara. Thanks, Ted, for sharing that one. And Dick Westheimer too. Is usually here, but he couldn't be here today, given the time he's on the road, I guess. And he asked if we could read this if we have time, and we do. So let's read this one. He says he's on the road back from Baltimore. Let's see. Well, here we go. This is Dick Westheimer's poem for the prompt. Why They Always First Come for the Poets, with words drawn from the poems of Mossab Abu Toha, the Palestinian poet who was arrested but then released eventually, thankfully, earlier this week. So here's Dick's poem, Why They First Come for the Poets. Dear Mossab Abu Toha, with gratitude for these poems you write on ash, for the ones scribed on the rubble of your home, for the ink you bled on the back of your grandparents' wedding photo, dare I give thanks for your body under arrest, for your small son, Mustafa, they told you to drop, for your wife and kids you had to abandon like birds falling from the nest of your arms, and for you singing that song about a headless doll lying in the dust, because if not for all that I would not have known what you know, eggplant fields growing flat beneath tank tracks, the slow death of survival, your shadow that's been waiting for your return. If you were still free from the beatings, still had your passport, were still headed south on foot, I'd not have a poem of yours to hold in my mouth, to recite to my family gathered to eat food not seasoned with dust and ash, within four walls that stand strong as the shoulders of a person who's never seen war, never been driven from his land, never felt like he lived in a cage, killed every day, only able to panic and breathe, panic and breathe, panic and breathe. You surrender your body to soldiers who showed what war does to humans, whose leaders are like little Macbeths, whose ranks hang loose about them like giant robes on dwarfish thieves, who conspire to make sure no poet like you can stand, cannot breathe words with their breathing that make the distant and blinded men like me cover our eyes with our senseless hands rather than coins, and at last ask for forgiveness. That is your gift. So that was Dick Westheimer here in spirit as he drives back. Why they always first come for the poets. So thanks so much for sharing that, Dick, and a really important story that thankfully had a relatively positive ending. So thanks for sharing that too, Dick. Now, that is going to be it for the open lines today. Let me double check. Yeah, that's going to be it for the open lines today for the prompt lines. Thanks everybody for sharing poems. Let's take it back to our prompt poems editor, Katie Dozier. Hi, Katie. How are you doing?
Hi, good. So many wonderful poems today.
Yeah, definitely. There always are, and I love getting to do a prompt, and we all sort of tackling the same monster, and we're in it together. What do you have for us next week that we can all try our hands at?
Oh God!
I thought you were supposed to put it in. The whole plan is you put it in a document, and then you can read it, so you can be the one to share it. Okay.
Yeah, but then the document is next week. We'll be in person. I'll be sharing.
That's true. Okay. So, so this week's prompt is to write a poem that addresses a pain from childhood and use a refrain. So, write a poem that addresses a pain from childhood that uses a refrain. That is the prompt for this week. So inspired by Joshua, of course. And, there's a lot of things, a lot of different kinds of pain, and a lot of ways we can heal by having a container for them, by thinking about them more clearly. And that's really one of the main jobs of poetry. So good prompt for that, Katie. Do you have any thoughts about it?
Well, I really, with Joshua's book, the way he used because, to propel forward, a difficult and to write about. I would imagine it didn't sound like it was hard for him, but I assumed it would have been from the subject matter. But using that as a way to propel yourself further into the story and everything, I thought was really brilliant. So it could be like that, or more as a refrain. It might be a good time to bust out with a form that involves a refrain, because there are so many that you could use with that. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, and it's a good thing to explore, to help ourselves heal and examine something that pops into your head from childhood. That was painful, and whatever that means for you.
Yeah, really well said. So excellent prompt for next week. Again, that is write a poem that addresses a pain from childhood and use a refrain. So looking forward to that. Thanks, Katie. And looking forward to the poetry space on Thursday, like we mentioned, where we're going to be talking about criticism. To join that, just go to Katie's Twitter, because it's a Twitter space is how it works, or I guess X space. And that's why it's like a conference call that anybody can join if we want to participate. You just need a Twitter account, but go to Katie_Dozier to find that on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Right.
Yeah. You know what? We should also probably mention that this is the first prompt for the next series, for the next month of prompts. So make sure to send in the prompts for this month by the end of the month. And then this prompt is actually going to refer to, it will be the first one for the next batch. It's kind of the thing. There's always an untidy aspect to the fact that the months can't just be perfectly neat to accommodate our prompt poem.
Yeah, really.
Right.
That moon for not cycling exactly 28 days. Like what? Yeah. Why do you have to mess this up,
we write, poets, all we do is write poems about moon. So shouldn't it have helped us out?
Really, seriously. Well, yeah. So if you go to submit your prompt poems, I'll just do this here. You go to rattle.com. /prompts. It's really easy, or you drop down from the menu and go to the prompt poem of the month. There's a submittable link. We have all the prompts for this month listed there. There are 4 of them. Sometimes there's 5, but there's always at least 4 the way months work. And but what it is it's like based on the where the prompt is due for the show. So like November 27th is today. That's the last prompt like it was due in November. So that's the November prompt poem of the month. This one coming up, which is to be write about childhood pain using a refrain, is going to be for the next week's prompt. And I was about to click here to submit, but then I realized it would like put my personal contact information in because it's autofill and submittable, so I won't click that.
Also, you are not eligible, Tim Green.
I'm not eligible. Submit. Oh man, I was really hoping you
see
would...
how it feels.
Yeah, well, I know how it feels. I'm never eligible, so I'm used to it. But anyway, yeah, thanks so much, Katie, for that reminder too.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
All right. Yeah, that was Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor, of course. And let's close up the show with the Sciku of the week. And this is this science story that was inspired, that inspired this Sciku, is right down the street. So this is an article, and let me put it up here so we can see. This is NASA's Deep Space Optical Comm Demo sends and receives first data. And so that is the article, which it doesn't really tell you a lot. But what it is they're starting to use this like broadband kind of satellite communication with distant space probes. And they're using near infrared lasers to send data so that they're able to like stream video, even though there's like a several minute delay when you're millions of miles away still at the speed of light. You can still, actually have video coming down from like the Mars and things like that. But what they did is to test this satellite, they launched this probe out a while ago, and then they shot a beam of this infrared laser to the spacecraft from the mountain right there. It's Table Mountain right above Wrightwood, California. And I actually found this news story in my local like news Facebook group. And so it's really interesting to be able to send infrared light that way, thinking about that beam coming up in the middle of it was first thing in the morning, but you look up and you can't see it because it's infrared. So that's interesting to me. Anyway, and here is the prompt, or the Sciku that inspired. A little monoku. Here we go. It is, her look, a neon sign, infrared. Her look, a neon sign, infrared. That is the Sciku for this week. That is the show for this week. Thanks, everybody, once again, for being guests and for participating at this unusual time, too. 8 hours ahead of when we usually do it. But we had a good crowd. We had a great group of prompt poems, too. So thanks, everybody, for participating. Now, next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Bob Hickok. He's back. He was originally scheduled in September, had a family emergency. We had another poet come in and take his place at the last minute graciously, and she did a great job too. But Bob Hickok is returning now. His newest book is Water, Look Away, which is a really powerful book about personal tragedy and attempted suicide. And it's a narrative book too. And in typical Bob Hickok fashion, he does not want to read a single poem from this new book that just came out. He only wants to read books probably from like 2 books down the line that he's interested in now. So he said already that he's not going to read anything from Water, Look Away, but he will be reading brand new poems because that's what Bob Hickok does. He is the guest on Rattlecast number 222, Monday, December 4th, back to the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Just hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.